Susan Carpenter, and I'm the native plant garden curator and gardener here at the Arboretum. And I take care of the 4-acre native plant garden that represents the native plant communities of southern Wisconsin. Came to Wisconsin originally to go to graduate school in botany and plant ecology. In school, we had our methods classes here, so field methods. So we learned how to sample trees. I had to learn all the identification of all the species because I didn't come from Wisconsin originally. That was a really good experience for the job that I came into decades later, which is the job I'm in now. I usually work with about 50 volunteers per year, and so altogether 800 people have volunteered in the garden, and some of them multiple years. It has a lot of value, a place to learn. And I mean, it's been a broader place to learn too, not just for people to learn plants, learn about birds or insects or whatever they're interested in, but it's also been a place where we're a research center as well. So researchers have been working here since the very beginning. In fact, before the Arboretum was even established, we had Aldo Leopold. We have the research focus, but we also have the public education focus and the public enjoyment focus. So people have been coming here just for exercise or for peace and quiet, to get together with a friend and maybe walk around. So those are some values that it has in the community that really don't even touch on the biological or ecological value that it has in the, in the landscape more broadly. Invasive species is kind of an interesting term because people use it in a lot of different ways. So the way I'm going to use it is species that are not native here, and so they're not adapted, and the plants and animals, they might not have protection, or might not have evolved a kind of standoff, protection against an invasive species. Some of them were introduced accidentally, so like the emerald ash borer is an invasive insect, and it's from Asia. It was originally brought over. It was stowaway kind of in packing material, and the infestation started in the Detroit area. So materials came in, just shipping materials, and the insect got out, and it attacks ash trees and it's pretty much completely fatal to ash trees. So it's a larva that's in the wood, and then the trees eventually, not too long, will succumb to that. We have some jumping worms, and those there are a couple ways that those have been spread around the country. One is in plant materials that have been grown like in an area where jumping worms have been introduced, and like maybe in the southeast, and then those plants in their pots are shipped all around. And so if the worms are in there or the cocoons are in the soil and you plant that plant, now you have that. And that is actually how we think that we got them here about 15 years ago at the Arboretum. The Arboretum was the first place in Wisconsin that they were documented. Probably not the first place where they were, but the first place that they were discovered, that they were here. And then it's kind of a good opportunity because we could immediately be doing research about them and outreach about their, how to protect your garden if you don't have them yet, like how to avoid getting them. So that's another example. Another example with the jumping worms is fishing bait. So they are sometimes sold in some states as fishing bait. A lot of the invasives are, they travel with humans, and human activity leads to them being there. Generally, when we talk about restoration, we're kind of talking about the plant communities, but there's a reason for that. We're not just interested in plants at the expense of anything else. There were plant ecologists also involved in those early days, John Curtis, who the prairie is named after, as an example. And there was an effort to restore plant communities. Plants and native plants are the basis of the food web for everything else. So if the native plants aren't there, then there's less available for all the native animals that have co-evolved with these plants for millennia. And they don't do as well if you plant, say, ornamental plants that are from somewhere else in the world. Those aren't the plants that they're from. I mean, they could sometimes use them, but they're not plants that they're kind of in a really tight relationship with. We want to have a lot of diversity in the plant, in the plant communities, like the kind of restore, build, create the best plant communities that we can with diversity and abundance of plants, using management practices that encourage the plants to grow well and reproduce well. We add seed sometimes to get the populations up, or add new species that aren't back there yet. So that's always what we're doing with the plants, and it has the effect of course, supporting insects, snakes, all the mammals, and birds, so that insects that feed on the plants are then the caterpillars are then taken by songbirds to feed their young. So the food webs, you think it's just like different levels, but it's really these are really complicated relationships. And to have as much of that intact and reintroduced if it's not there yet, or enhanced if it is there, that's kind of the overall goal. The way it works out with a lot of the plant invasive species is they're not native to here. They were introduced by any number of ways. It could have been accidental. It could have been actually by being an ornamental plant grown in gardens, and then it has fruits, and then the birds eat the fruits and they fly over and drop the seeds. Now you have that plant planted over here. Unintentional. Once it gets into a community, if it's an effective invasive, and we use that for certain things that just can take off. They respond well if there's, say, the loss of native species in that plant community. There's openings for them, or they're bigger than the smaller plants, or they shade the smaller plants, or the community itself becomes more shady and they do well there, but the plants that were there originally that needed more sunlight or needed fire to come through cannot do as well, so they have an advantage that way. Some of our shrub species that are invasive have a really longer season than the native plants. So they're green, they green up faster in the spring, and then they stay green longer in the fall. So they kind of have an advantage there in that they can grow at times when the native flora isn't as vigorous or isn't as. So competition would be one way that they can harm a native plant community, and just taking up space that other plants would be in if the invasives weren't there. Some of them are very effective at reproducing. I mean, that's why they're a notable invasive, because they continue to spread. One of them in particular, we have the round-leafed bittersweet vine, which is from Asia. It actually grows up on trees and coils around, and it can actually cut, over time, as it grows bigger and the tree tries to go bigger, it actually can harm the canopy of the tree because the tree can't transport its nutrients up and down. So that's a kind of physical, like, I don't know, battle that it can form. But that plant is also very prolific with seeds. It can grow in semi-shade, shade, sun. It climbs trees, so it gets up, even if it's shady down low, it gets up in the sun because it's up in the top of the tree. So that's another kind of maybe a little bit unusual example, because mostly they're not. Most of the invasives aren't actually physically strangling trees, but that one is a serious problem. It can be a huge impact. Like, we have restorations going on now over dozens of acres where we have a tree layer, and if you look at the trees, you can tell by their shape that when they grew up, they were in an open area. There wasn't a shrub, there weren't shrubs or other small trees with them. They were the oldest trees. They were growing out in the open, kind of scattered around. But then over time, say buckthorn is one of our biggest invasive shrubs, and honeysuckle. Those could cover an entire area under the older trees. They're both bird dispersed fruits. And so they were very successful, and they're both ones that have that extended season. When I say shrub, I mean they could be as big as this room, or buckthorn can become a tree. Honeysuckle, the biggest honeysuckle I've ever seen, maybe a trunk about 6 to 8 inches, maybe a foot in diameter, with multiple stems that would maybe fill up this room, like volume-wise. So the practice would be to cut them all, and we have a tool now here at the Arboretum that is handy for that. It's a forestry mower, so it can basically drive through and take all that down. Now, does it kill them for good? No, you have to go back and treat with herbicide on cut stems and so forth, resprouts that might, because the plant's not going to give up. It's going to try to grow again after being cut off. Some of the restoration areas, that's the first step of beginning to open up the ground layer and introduce species. If they don't, some of those species, like the native species, even after they've been shaded for decades, are still present and they can still come up. As a curator or as an ecologist here, you want to have your eyes on the ground all the time. Usually you'd have a hint if there was a seed source. You'd be like, there's a seed source nearby, or there's a seed source that got in here somehow of a plant that we don't want more of. So you'd kind of go for the seed source, get rid of that first. That might be a good step. We have a horticultural garden, which has a long history. It's been here for 90 years, where all the lilacs and the crab apples, magnolias, and it has 4,000 specimens from all over the world. Has had some species in it that have become known to be invasive. So our curator for the horticultural garden has removed those specimens from the horticultural collection, knowing that the turkeys are going to eat the fruits and walk over into the woods and drop the seeds, and now we have that plant in the woods where it doesn't belong. And then there's some other examples now, I think, of plants that are from further south in the US. They can survive here, but up until now, they haven't had a long enough season or the right kind of temperatures and so forth to flower and reproduce and create seed. And the seed, or if it did, the seeds weren't able to become seedlings, and the conditions weren't right. So you basically had a plant that was kind of able to live here, but not able to do everything in a plant's life cycle that it was. Now, with warmer temperatures, growing zones shifting to warmer situations, like the growing zone here has changed one whole number since I started working here 20-some years ago. So that means it's warmer, much warmer than it was, on average. It's overall warmer. And that means that some plants from, say, a little further south are now not just surviving, oh wow, that plant's never bloomed here before, but now it's blooming consistently? Maybe it's just blooming and it's not really creating good seeds. Are seeds viable? How are they spread? maybe we could check to see if they are viable and germinating. And if so, is this going to be an issue or not? In the garden, for example, we don't have invasive species like at that extent because we are watching for them. Like, we're gardening, so we're on a very small scale, which the 4-acre garden is, with as many people, working in every area as we move around. We can keep our eyes open for problems as they are small, and then, if we see a little patch of an invasive species, we can just pull it up and then we're done. Whereas if you're out in a 40-acre forest and there's 40 acres of it, you have a different situation. You can't pull everything up when it's little because there's too much of it. There's not enough of you. Kind of combination of proactive and observant, but also reactive for situations where you're just learning along the way, because every day you're learning something around here. There's never a day where you're not learning something about the way everything works. When the Arboretum was established, this was like out of town. Literally, the oldest neighborhoods that are close to the Arboretum were literally just brand new or being built. And so it was a lot of foresight at that point to kind of set aside this land. It was, like really looking into the future. The people who did it were really, it was lucky for one thing, but it was also kind of a lot of foresight to see that, wait a minute, it would be good to have. And now, of course, Madison is completely surrounding the Arboretum. The Beltline, of course, has been first built and then expanded, I think 3 times. So, there's lots of pressures and lots of different situations. We probably have 1 million visitors a year. We don't know for sure, but it's probably close to that if you count the recreational use as well as the actual use here for programming and learning and volunteering and so forth. So if that hadn't happened at the beginning, this would have been housing, or where it's too wet, it would have been maybe drained. If it weren't here, I think there would be that big hole where that value would be lost. It would be a big loss for birds and rare insects and all the wildlife, the other wildlife that we have here. Surely the native plants and trees and climate, moderation. Trees lower the temperatures. The other functions that the place has, like infiltrating water, purifying water as it comes through, from storm water out to the lake. Certainly, if we look at it from the perspective of now, it would be a big loss for the university in terms of being a place where research and teaching goes on all the time, but probably even a bigger loss for the community. Gets back to what I said at the beginning of what the value of it is at all these different levels. The university doesn't make any money off of it or anything. We have a staff here and we have a building here, which is part of the university, but it's not like it's an income. It's not like a football game. There's a lot of community value to it that's, not actually monetized or anything. Most of our events are free. Tours, garden tours, volunteering, hiking. There's no entrance fee. There's no membership fee unless you want to become a member. Lots of people do want to support the Arboretum because they love it. Yeah, it would be a big loss, but I guess a loss that we would only know because we know its value now.